video is going to walk you through some ideas from Hurley's Concise Introduction to Logic, Chapter 1, Section 1.1 on Arguments, Premises, and Conclusions. So this section is pretty introductory. It covers just some basic concepts, and the three concepts you're going to be looking at are arguments, premises, and conclusions. Now, Hurley does give some really important definitions, so you want to make sure you pay attention to those. The first definition that he gives is the definition of logic. So logic is, as Hurley says here, an organized body of knowledge or science that evaluates arguments, right? Now notice this this terminology here, science, right? A science is just an organized body of knowledge. Now, of course, this course in critical thinking is a philosophy course, not a science course. But the notion of science here is broader than, say, the physical sciences or the social sciences. It simply means an organized body of knowledge. So logic is really the study of what arguments are. It studies them. It gives knowledge about them. But please note this notion of knowledge, right? At the end of this course in critical thinking, you're going to know something. You're going to have knowledge about arguments and how to evaluate them. So let me just say something here about this notion of evaluation, right? What is an evaluation? Well, we do evaluations all the time. Right? You go on Google, you do an evaluation, you rate or you rank maybe a restaurant, give a review of a restaurant you ate at, or a dentist or a mechanic that you visited. Right? We do evaluations all the time. We look at something and we say, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. In fact, there are other types of people who do evaluative judgments, say a referee or an umpire or a judge in a sporting event, right? So let's say you're in a surf contest and you take your couple waves or take a wave, and then the judges, they evaluate that. Or if you're playing softball or playing basketball, and the referee, the umpire, depending on the game, might blow their whistle or make a hand sign of some kind saying that person is safe, or that is a strike, or that's a ball, or that person's out, or that's out of bounds, or that's offsides, or whatever the case may be. So logic is kind of like that. Logic functions as kind of the referee for philosophy and arguments that are made in the three areas of philosophy that we looked at in ontology, epistemology, axiology. So logic is an evaluative. It is also a normative discipline. Normative simply means that it looks at right and wrong, good and bad. Now here, this notion of right and wrong and good and bad aren't necessarily moral. They're related to what is moral, but it's not the same thing in logic. Logic functions to look at arguments and say of those arguments, that's a good argument, that's a bad argument. That's a valid argument, that's an invalid argument. That's a strong induction, that's a weak induction. That's good evidence, that's not good evidence, right? So logic is an organized body of knowledge that evaluates, that says whether an argument is good or bad. Okay, so you just want to keep that in mind. It's a really important concept. And remember, throughout this whole course, especially when we look at fallacies later on, you need to remember that we are doing and we are offering arguments for things. Okay, so that's the first concept you want to think about. The second concept that's offered here in the text is the concept of an argument. The concept of an argument. A lot of times people think of arguments as a verbal fight, right? I got in a fight with my best friend last night, and we were yelling at each other, and it was just a really stupid fight. We got in this big argument. Or I got in an argument with my uncle about something, and we just screamed at each other. Right? It's like arguments are not verbal fights. They can be, I guess. They can involve those. But in the study of logic, or in our course in critical thinking, an argument has a more specific kind of definition. So let me give you an example here of a goofy way to think about an argument. So let's take a look at this clip. All right, well, that's a goofy definition of an argument. Sorry, I just laugh every time I watch this. But so I don't know if you caught in the video, but there was a pretty good definition of an argument: a collected series of statements intended to establish a proposition. Sorry, I can't do it with a British accent, but um, that's almost exactly what Hurley's saying here, right? An argument is a group of statements, one or more of which the premises give support for reasons to believe one of the others, the conclusion, right? So every argument has that structure. That's just what an argument is. An argument is something that always has this structure. Let me just take you down to this, right? An argument is always, this is just what an argument amounts to. An argument, right? Has premises, claimed evidence, and a conclusion. And the purpose of critical thinking and logic is this is the inference, the rational inference that we evaluate. This is what is evaluated. Primarily what is evaluated, right? So when we're evaluating arguments, we are looking to see whether or not the actual evidence that's given actually does prove or give good reasons for the conclusion of the argument. That's just what we're doing. So there's also some discussion of what premises are and what conclusions are. But remember, statements are not by themselves arguments, right? A statement by itself is never an argument. An argument has a specific meaning, right, in logic. So a set of statements by itself is never an argument. What has to be the case is, in an argument, is some attempt to prove something, some inference, some attempt, let's just call this an attempt at proof, and now if the argument is a good argument, that attempt will be successful to one extent or another, right? Now, just because an argument is successful and is good doesn't mean everyone's going to believe it. This is one of the amazing things about human beings, is that we can disbelieve things that we often know to be true by means of argumentation. Right? Someone can give you a really good argument for something, and I might still disbelieve it. Right? So that's basically what an argument is. An argument always has premises and a conclusion and an attempt at proof. And what's evaluated is this logical inference, that attempt to reach the conclusion by the premises. Okay, so make sure that you're following along with that. That's a really important concept. All right, this next little section here towards the end of 1.1 gives you some ways to tell in a passage whether or not there's an argument going on. The main thing you have to ask yourself when you're looking at a passage in philosophy or anything else is ask this: is the author trying to prove something, right? Is there an attempt at proof? Is there an attempt at proof or proving something? And if there is attempt at proof, then you've probably got an argument on your hands, right? You've got something that is an argument. Now, you might wonder, well, what is being proven, right? How do you tell what's being proven, what are the premises, and what's the conclusion? How do you tell the difference? Well, sometimes there are indicator words that authors will use. For example, for a premise, like words like since or because or for or given, right? Those premise indicator words. And then there are also conclusion indicator words sometimes that are possible. Let me see, give you some of those. Sorry to scroll back here. Conclusion indicator words, here they are. Things like therefore or thus, these are two, or hence, right? These are all conclusion indicator words. So anytime you see those indicator words, that's probably going to be a good sign that you've got an argument. But not always, not always. For example, I think this is in the next section, but I'll just mention it here. Words like since can be used in a temporal way, right? If I said something like, since 1990, there's been a massive increase in communications technology. And since to the year 2010, the availability of streaming video has massively increased. And then suppose I say, and since the year 2018, global transportation is also massively increased. And that's all I say, right? I've said the word since, and since 3 times, but I'm not using it in a logical way. I'm using it in a temporal way. So just because there's an indicator word doesn't guarantee that that a statement is a premise or maybe even a conclusion. It's just an indication. If you want to know that whether or not you've got an argument going in a passage, always ask yourself this: is there an attempt at proving something? And if there is an attempt at proving something, then you might look for the indicator words. But sometimes arguments don't have them. And this gets a little tricky. Sometimes the best you can do is say, well, look, I read a passage and I'm not sure if it's an argument, but if it is an argument, this is likely the conclusion and these are likely the premises, right? So you kind of have to maybe do some interpretation sometimes when you read articles or passages that just may not be clear. But if an argument is given, that argument will always have these 3 parts: premises, conclusion, and an attempt at inference. And that's what an argument amounts to. And logic is that science of evaluating those arguments. And that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of the term. All right, thanks for watching.
Stay psyched, Grom. You.